Hi everyone, this is Germinal Van, founder of GGV Publishing Company and your host for the GGV Publishing Podcast. Today we got a very special guest, one of my favorite, Dr. Richard Moss, who wrote this voluminous work entitled The Empire of Eunuchs: How the Republican Party Betrayed America. This book is not for sensitive souls. So for those who see the title at first, especially the subtitle, they will think that he's taking a liberal stance, but on the contrary, Dr. Moss expressed his views about how the Republican Party got too weak. So before we dive into the book, Dr. Moss, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you. Well, I must begin where I grew up, which of course is the land of legend, the fabled Bronx in New York City. And I was one of five boys raised by a single mom before the age of the single mom. And we really sort of had not started into the whole great society. And I'm so grateful for that because it's so appealing. And I often wonder if, let's say it had been 10 years later, what would have become of myself and my four brothers. But anyway, we missed that. My mother worked every day of her life and took care of her five kids. And so we have that background, which I always think about, and my beloved mother as well. And my father died when we were very young. You didn't have five children unmarried in that age. So yes, my father actually passed away when he was quite young. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we have that background, and growing up with my four brothers, most of whom are high school educated, mm-hmm. Very working class background. And then I, had an interest in, education and going further. And so I was first into humanities, the liberal arts and writing and so forth. But then as it strikes many people at a certain age, this idea of becoming a doctor is sort of this magical pursuit. And so I decided I would pursue that. I had incredible discouragement, by the way. Advisors very strongly said, your chances are like 1 in 5,000. It's extremely competitive. So, who knows? I could have backed out, but and I was interested in carpentry and building and construction. But I also always had this interest in humanities and writing. But anyway, I went to Indiana, and I went to the Indiana University in Bloomington, and then to the IU, Indiana University School of Medicine. And then I did my residency in ENT, ear, nose, and throat, head and neck. And I did that in New York City at the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary. I did a fellowship in plastic surgery in San Francisco, UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. And then I spent the next 3 years working overseas as a cancer surgeon in mainly Southeast Asia, Thailand, Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. And this was completely on my own. I was not part of a group. And I just went from place to place, really, but mainly in those four countries. And interesting, the cases there are extremely advanced. People, they see a lump in the neck, they have to wait until it's about the size of a melon before they'll seek attention. So the kinds of cases that we saw were extremely advanced and very challenging. And but I tell you, I love that part of my life, and I never would have come back except, I earned no money in doing that. And so but you can live very cheaply. It's amazing how long you can go. But in the end, I had zero money. And so I had to return, and so I did. But really, it remains actually a disappointment that I could not continue that life. But the trade-off was that I formed a family. My wife and I, we married actually in Asia. That's a whole other story, but that's fine. And but we have four kids, and if I never returned, I may never have gone in that direction of having a family. So it's okay. But So that's sort of a brief background.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moss. I really appreciate this background. It's you started really from the bottom, and look at you now, like you're a very successful surgeon. Can you tell me a little bit how you came to form your clinic? And because it's amazing, I'm really amazed at what you chose to do, specifically being a surgeon. It's one of the hardest job on earth. I don't know how you could be that cold-blooded to actually perform that kind of work because you have a human life in your hands. And like I think like the slightest mistake can cost the patient his life or her life. And it's amazing how you still decide to go into that very direction and you literally build a tremendous career for yourself in that. So how did you come about how did you come about the formation of your clinic and then how everything went from there?
So yeah, we came back, and I should mention that that age, most doctors were in private practice.
Mhm.
That's very different now, and I think it's much to the detriment of medicine because we no longer have an independent voice. Doctors are employed, and so they do as they're told. They're part
Mhm.
of corporate entity or owned by a hospital, and they dare not speak, as we all perhaps remember during the age of COVID. There was nary a independent voice to be found questioning the narrative about, let's say, the whole COVID phenomenon and the shutdowns and the lockdowns and the whole thing. A real disgrace, I think, a black mark on American medicine, I would say. The lack of an independent voice. But in that time, most doctors would be on their own. But I observed that change where I would say it's very few doctors that are self-employed. But anyway, I started my practice, and we moved to a small town, and a beautiful town, really a great place to live, I would say. And all the things like good schools, good economic base, low taxes, very safe, all the things that we talk about that we recognize as part of small town America.
Mhm.
And one of the benefits, Indiana is also an interesting state because it has a great malpractice law that limits the payments that are given out, and there's a tribunal that any uh, malpractice case has to pass through. So it sort of screens out the frivolous lawsuits. And I will tell you, when you're in plastic surgery and you're a surgeon, just in general, you think a lot about that, the
Yeah.
of litigation. So, there's a lot of things going for Indiana and a conservative state. But I would say that at that stage, my politics were not really so developed that I was thinking that much about that. But as it turned out, that fit in nicely with the direction that I would take
Yeah.
politically.
And that being said, well, now we dive into your political journey. So how did you become a conservative? Were you always a conservative, or you start out as a liberal Democrat and then, there was that magical moment that, changed everything in your life? Like, how did you become a conservative Republican?
So when I began, my early years, I would say I would be your archetypal Jewish New York left-wing radical. No doubt about it. I was, having forming protests and, anti-war, at that time, the Vietnam War. And, I would say I would have been considered a Democrat, but more just a total radical. And then, let's say I went into medicine, I got more serious about things, and devoted myself more to studies rather than politics. But I would say I began to evolve a little bit. And, in a way, I think that the ascendancy of Ronald Reagan had an effect. I sort of knew that I'm not supposed to like Reagan, but I appreciated him. And then I started to read National Review, Buckley's magazine,
Mhm.
and he was still alive at that time. And he was a very elegant, uh, speaker and great writer as well. You know, I think most of us know. And I became influenced as well. And it gave me a little bit of the intellectual underpinnings of conservative thinking and philosophy. And so it came to pass that I went from which is a common story, I think, from a left-wing radical to a fire-breathing, rock-rib conservative Republican.
Yeah, I see. And would you say that Ronald Reagan has been your favorite U.S. president of all times, or who's your favorite president?
Well, I mean, my lifetime, I would, Reagan and I would speak strongly about Donald Trump as well. But I mean, all time, you got to go down with George Washington. I mean, the founding father, there'd be no country without him, and so heroic and so modest. But he is truly the model for presidents and leaders in general. And as you probably know, when he actually moved away from power after he had won the Revolutionary War and went back to Virginia, but later on was called to become president. But he actually gave up power.
Yeah.
And was called by his former adversary, King George III. If he indeed has done that, then he is the greatest man on earth.
Yeah.
And I would say that he was. And so, and we've had many great presidents, Adams, all the founding fathers, and Jefferson, and so forth, Madison, Monroe, and then, Lincoln, of course, and others. I would consider Roosevelt a great wartime leader, but extremely destructive.
Yeah.
In many ways, I think we all would agree with that on our side of the political spectrum. But I give him credit as far as guiding the country through war, and defeating the Nazis and the Japanese. But otherwise, in our era, certainly Reagan, and then I like Trump as well.
Donald Trump. And who would you say is the worst of all?
Well, I would say that Barack Obama.
Barack Obama?
Yeah, truly the worst, because he had such an opportunity, and I talk a lot about this in the book, that obviously, as we hear ad infinitum, the first Black president and all of this endless racial rhetoric. We don't look at people as individuals anymore. We look at them as members of a race or ethnicity or of a sex, all of which I reject. It's un-American. But he had the golden opportunity. If that first Black president had been, Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, and really a host of others, that even a Condoleezza Rice, who's sort of a liberal, even a Colin Powell, sort of liberal, not my favorite at all, but I think he had a patriotism. If we had somebody, I think all of the racial division that is so resonant today really had the opportunity with the ascendancy of Obama to sort of be dissolved, because there you have proof, living proof, that America is a very open nation, that anyone can succeed. And had he been a different person, he would have, really trumpeted that. And I just think race relations, all of the racial issues that so typify American politics today, I think it would have disappeared. So he blew an incredibly important opportunity that we could never get back. And he set the nation back 50 years in terms of race relations. But that's the kind of person he was. He pulled the wool over America's eyes. He tried to pretend that he was some sort of a moderate. And as we know, he was a radical. And, now the second worst would, of course, be Biden, I guess. And then you have, we'll see what happens. I hope I will not have to say
Kamala.
Kamala, yes, that would be very tragic.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Boss, for elaborating on your favorite and your worst president. And now we're going to dive into the book. So when did you first start writing this book, and why did you take the time to write it?
Well, I do have an interest in general in writing and so forth, literature. So it was not that unusual for me to do that. I'm a columnist as well. I've written hundreds of articles. I've written two other books before this one. And really, I should be a writer, not a doctor, but that's okay. I think
You write very well, by the way.
Thank you so much. But really, my natural, I would say, aptitude is in writing. And I'd say I'm a decent surgeon. Let me not play that down as well. We work at both, but my natural inclination was literature and writing. So that came fairly natural. But as far as this book specifically, I wanted to sort of explain blow by blow my campaign, my efforts to run for office. Because in a way, my political career reflects this book, because I ran against a Republican incumbent in 2016 and 2018. Your typical rhino, Larry Bouchon, talking about the eighth, let me see, yeah, the ninth district, yeah, it would be the ninth. Yeah, it went back and forth. But anyway, at that time, the ninth district in Indiana congressional district. And it's very hard to go against an incumbent. That was in 2016. And I was, roundly or soundly defeated. And then I tried it again. And then finally he decided not to run again. And I thought this would be another opportunity. It would be an open seat. But the other rhino at the state level, if I may say, Mark Mesmer, our state senator, he got in. And so in effect, I was running against Larry Bouchon again. And it's very, there are exceptions like David Bratt in Virginia. We may remember 2014. He defeated what's his name? Anyway, with the glasses. I'm told I look like him, but he was the majority leader, and he actually took him on and defeated him. But generally, it is very difficult to beat the establishment. There's a reason we call them the establishment, the GOP establishment. So I'm 0 for 3. So I pursued it quite arduously. But anyway, the book sort of grows out of that experience and day to day, but other things as well. I intersperse articles that I had written throughout my career as a columnist, because they're timely. It would be a piece from 2008, at the height of, let's say, the race with Obama. And some choice articles that I had about him. I recognized quite early on that he was truly a charlatan and pretending to be something that he was not, which is that he was a moderate. So there's pieces about that, and just an array of articles about immigration and a lot about Israel, foreign policy, the Middle East, which I think I have a reasonable knowledge of. And so many different articles that are interspersed in the book. So it's, but mainly it characterizes or captures my political journey, if you will.
Yeah.
And then my efforts to run, and sort of the blow by blow, day by day, the people that I met, the issues at the time. And so, but the book is broken down into 3 sections. The first is the title of the book, The Empire of Eunuchs. And when I say eunuchs, I am referring to the Republicans, because they are really sort of the castrati, I would say, totally abandoning all of their principles. And, I think they are a very, just that they are quite dangerous and have been quite destructive of the conservative movement, because they pretend to be one thing. And, if I had to, so, it's certainly about the Republicans and growing out of that experience. But so the first part is the Empire of Eunuchs itself, and I go into some detail about how the Republican Party has betrayed America, how it had certain talking points and campaign literature, and always ran on certain issues, but never delivered. They truly were, what we describe today as the controlled opposition, part of the Uni Party, but the inferior part of the Uniparty. They obviously bow before their Democrat masters, but they again pretend to be conservative, traditionalist, America first, all of these things. But there's just a tiny, tiny percentage of them that actually are. And so I do a major takedown of them because, I think they enable the Democrats. If, and Lenin talked about this as well, and I think he came up with that term, the controlled opposition. But if the Republicans did not exist, the Democrats would have to create them because it legitimizes them. They could say, well, look, you have an opposition party. But the reality is we scarcely have an opposition party. You can say a small handful are individuals that we would respect. But there's a great separation between the Republican Party and the Republican base, unlike the Democrats. The Democrats love their base. They want to satisfy their base. They are in lockstep with their base. The Republican Party, the establishment, loathes their base. They they're a business. They're there to make a living. They want a piece of the pie. They want to have their seat at the table, and so they again have their talking points, but rarely will you see them actually try to get their policies over the finish line. And so we're endlessly frustrated, but we think we have nowhere else to go. And so we keep feeding them and voting for them and donating to them and all of this. But I think they're really quite a dangerous party.
So in the book, you pretty much say that the moderate conservatives specifically are the real, or pretty much as we call them, the rhino. They're the ones who actually conceded to Democrats. Can you name one or two rhinos that you would say contributed to giving American culture, even the economy, to the Democrats? Because today, when we look at American culture, it's heavily influenced by Democrat politics. And I remember you said earlier when you were talking about your background that you grew up in a single parent household, but it was not at the time. It was not a result of the Great Society policies. And today, when we talk about single parent households, and you even wrote a chapter about that, it's the outcome of the Great Society policies. So it pretty much undermines people personal responsibility. Today, right, we have single mothers, and they're proud to be single mothers. They even do it deliberately. They have kids with different men so that they can collect checks from the government to the welfare programs. And there's some Republicans who actually fear, I would say even most Republicans actually never wanted to dismantle the welfare state. Why do you think is that? Why, and who are some of those rhinos who support the welfare state, in your opinion?
Well, it's so entrenched, and it would be so dangerous for their political careers. They'd have to put themselves out on the line. And the welfare state, I mean, it's so established, and there's so many that are dependent on it. At this stage, it would be quite difficult to dismantle. Nonetheless, I think we need to make an argument for liberty. All the policies that we favor, bringing jobs back and, stop exporting our factories and jobs overseas for the advantages. It's a little cheaper labor, and you evade some of the labor laws and environmental laws and all of that. Staying out of the forever wars, which have consumed so much of our blood and treasure. And of course, sealing the border, sort of the Iron Triangle. But as far as, I mean, the easier question would be, who would be an apostle of the sort of conservative traditionalist America First, I guess we're using that term now, MAGA, sort of conservative politics that we embrace today. By the way, I was MAGA before MAGA.
You were a true conservative Republican.
Yeah, I was writing all about what you would describe as America First and MAGA before Donald Trump ran for office, 2015. But that's fine. He's done a lot to move that along. But I think it'd be easier to. I mean, it's the entire Republican Party. It's the few, the Ted Cruzes and maybe the Rand Paul. He's a little iffy on certain issues, but he's a libertarian sort of guy, and kind of follows a little bit in the footsteps of his father, who overall, I think he's good, but not in every way. There are others as well. I say, but I would just say the overwhelming majority do not fit the bill, and they again talk the talk, but do not walk the walk, as we say. But McConnell would certainly be your archetypal, and Jim Thune and Cornyn, all those senators, and of course we went through Adam Kinzinger and Cheney, Liz Cheney, and those would be the worst examples. But the whole lot of them, I would say, they talk a good game, but they rarely produce. We have some, they're maybe getting better, but just in general, the party, and it's partly the primary system, because it's so hard. Again, as I was saying, it's so hard to unseat an incumbent.
Yeah.
And there's no other way other than perhaps if we move to a caucus system, not a primary system, because then it's the money and the name ID, the name recognition. And so it's so hard if you've been there for 1 or 2 or 3 terms, it's very hard to unseat you. And that's your only time to start to attempt to change the party. It's an uphill battle, but there are things that we can do. But I certainly think, for example, Gingrich's contract with America, when the Hillary Care 92 and 93, and then you had the Gingrich Revolution in 94, you saw that pushback, and we actually balanced the budget. I would say that, but how we got set back was George Bush. I mean, that's your classic rhino, the whole Bush family. And he did everything, added a new program, the prescription drug bill, which, we just can't afford this kind of generosity. He got us involved in forever wars. He totally mishandled. He was an open borders guy. I mean, he's just like the worst. But the worst thing about him is that because he was such a, you try to imagine, you had 6 years from 2000 to 2006, where you had the Republicans controlling the presidency and both houses. An amazing thing. And you had 6 years to demonstrate the efficacy of true conservative America First governance. He just blew it, totally blew it. And that led to the Democrats taking over the House and Senate in 2006. And then, of course, Barack Obama coming in 2008. It was a terrible missed opportunity because of the classic rhino, George Bush, who had both houses, and he was the president, and just really squandered a great opportunity to show what strong, conservative, limited government governance could have been about. And I describe him as the second worst president.
Yeah, you wrote an entire chapter on him about that. There are a few chapters, Dr. Moss, that I would like you to address. One that I found really fascinating was Robespierre Democrats. Can you describe who are the Robespierre Democrats and why you call them Robespierre? I mean, I personally know who is Robespierre, but for people who are not familiar with Robespierre and why you call them Robespierre Democrats.
Well, you know, the sort of foundational left-wing radical Marxist revolutionary movement was the Jacobins and the French, you know, the reign of terror, you know, the guillotine, was always thirsty for more blood and ran, you know, so what better symbol of the danger of left-wing Marxist politics, and the leader of that, of course, and eventually he met his fate the same way as I'm sure you know, Robespierre. So he would be your sort of ultimate Jacobin, was Robespierre. I mean, and you know, I would say what we're seeing today in the Democrat Party is a Jacobin movement. I mean, it's a radical Marxist movement. This is not the Democrat Party of Bill Clinton. You know, I would say let's go with Bill Clinton. I'd gladly accept Bill Clinton, Democrat. You know, I'm not a fan of his by any stretch. But by the way, it's a funny thing. He came to Jasper, Indiana. Try to imagine.
Oh, when?
I think it was when Hillary was trying, you know, was running. So I guess that would have been 2015. And he came to Jasper. And, you know, everyone, because I'm a columnist and everyone, you know, the Democrats don't like me very much here. But I said, look, if we got an ex-president coming to Jasper, I'm going to go check him out. And I'm going to tell you, that guy spoke off the cuff for like an hour and a half, sort of like Trump, you know, just like, I give him credit. I think he was a smart dude. You know, let's say, unlike, you know, I don't consider Biden obviously to be particularly bright, nor do I think Obama is particularly bright either. You know, he just, but anyway, he's heralded as such a figure, but I don't see that. But Bill Clinton was quite bright. But anyway, that's off topic. But it's funny though, because Democrats say, what the hell are you doing here? All the local Democrats, you know, this is our deal. But anyway, it was interesting to see him. But anyway, Robespierre, I think really, so the Democrats that we had, even, you know, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago would be very different to what we have now. I mean, it's been a radicalized Democrat Party. It's quite different. I mean, the whole LGBT, the tranny issues, you know, all of these things. I mean, the important thing is that the Democrat Party used to be the working class party. And, you know, I thought there was some merit to that. You know, they were pro-union, of course, but mainly they represented the working class. And one of the things I argue for in the book, and I think we're sort of seeing that, you know, mainly, perhaps more so with Trump, is that the Republican Party is gradually shifting to become the working class party, which I think is a wise move. We know that the Democrats despise the working class. Those are your deplorables, you know, the chumps, as Biden called them, and the bitter clingers, as Obama referred to them. But I think they're up for grabs, and I think you know, Trump has obviously seized that. But I would just say that the current crop of Democrats are radicalized Jacobin Democrats. It's a revolutionary movement. They have no connection with the Democrat Party, you know, 15, 20 years ago, other than in name. Truly unrecognizable, hence the name Robespierre Democrats.
That makes sense. And would you mind talking about the chapter on Republicans, Black and race? Because I think like the race relations is one issue where Republicans in general like they lag behind. And now with Donald Trump, however, there's a big awakening, especially in the Black community. For some reason, Black people identify more with Trump nowadays than it has been the case throughout history. So do you mind talking about that specific chapter of the book?
You know, another example again of what a failed party the Republican Party is. I mean, do they not remember who freed the slaves, who fought a war? and who were behind all of the various civil rights legislation that was passed. Even during President Grant's time, Grant was obviously a Republican. And then in the 50s with Eisenhower, a Republican. And then the civil rights legislation was mainly pushed by Republicans. But so to me, the argument is so straightforward. The Democrat Party should properly be labeled as the party of the Confederacy, the party of slavery, because they were the party of slavery. What an easy argument to make. And they were the party of Jim Crow, the party of segregation, and of separate but equal. And so why is it difficult for Republicans to make that argument? It's historical, it's historically based. So clearly that should be an easy, the Republican Party should be the party of Blacks, without a shadow of a doubt. Again, Abraham Lincoln was the founder of the Republican Party, and he freed the slaves. He fought against the South, against the Confederacy. So to me, I urge Republicans to take your heritage, your legacy, and recognize that you should be very bold about reaching out to Blacks, that you have every right to reach out to Blacks. And how have Blacks done under Democrats? Really terribly. I mean, the cities are run by Democrats.
Yeah.
And the criminality affects mainly Blacks, the welfare dependency, the illegitimacy that leads to all the single parents and to academic failure, and again to criminality, incarceration, all of those things that we know. That's all a result of Democrat policies in Democrat-run cities. To me, if that's an easy argument, that Republicans have every right to seek Black votes and the support of Blacks, is just, it's an easy argument to me for all of those reasons.
And can you tell us more about the new N-word? There is a chapter on that you wrote too, called the new N-word. Do you mind elaborating on that?
Well, so again, one of the great dangers of our nation today is that the press, which is supposed to be opposed to power, is aligned with power. We obviously do not have a free press. We have a captured press. And for whatever reason, they have aligned themselves with the Democrat Party. And so they decide the narrative, as we know, and they can make or break you. I think they are the dominant institution in the country today, is the media. And the fact that they are aligned with the Democrats is quite dangerous. Their job should be to challenge power. But anyway, what's their favorite word? Well, we know they love the word racist.
No, they do.
They do. And but a sort of, even a step above that would be the new N-word, which of course is the insult of being called a Nazi. I mean, it's hard to go. I mean, that's even worse than being called a racist. To be a Nazi is like the worst thing imaginable. Although I think to be a communist and a Marxist is equally as bad. I don't distinguish. But just say, Hitler is, we understand is characterized as the ultimate symbol of evil. And I'm not going to disagree with that, but there are other equally bad examples. But
Stalin.
Yeah, Stalin and who are some of the other left-wing greats?
Mao.
Yeah, okay, of course, Mao, and then Fidel, I suppose, and but certainly the those would be the big ones. Mao, Fidel, and especially Stalin is archetypal, and they were equally as bad. But again, because the left writes the books, controls the film industry and the culture, they somehow diminished the evil of the left-wing tyrants, even though they were every bit as evil. So the ultimate insult is Nazi, although to call someone a Marxist or a communist to me should be equally as bad, because they were every bit as evil. But again, they control everything. So I just I use that the N-word because, you know, the original N-word, of course, is a word that you should never speak. Mm-hmm. There's a new N-word, and that's the word Nazi, and that's sort of liken it. It's such a evil insult to hurl at someone that we can even liken it to the new N-word. So they, again, got off scot-free. We all recognize Hitler. He certainly is ultimate evil. He is satanic. But I would say Stalin and Mao and Fidel and the other Marxist leaders are equally as evil.
And can you tell us some of the recommendations or some of the solutions that you proposed in the third part of the book? Because the book, like the two first parts, you did not hold back. Obviously, you said your piece, but you did not just based on the rhinos and Democrat. You also offered solutions to move forward for the Republican Party. Can you mention some of those solutions?
Well, I think the contract concept that began with Gingrich in '94, Contract with America, is a great sort of test, or just an easily stated and shared program or agenda. You know, 10 points, whatever number of points, you know, 10 is a good number. You know, the 10 Commandments, it's a good round number, and it's probably a good place to start. And so you outline, and I think Gingrich did this very effectively. The key thing is to hold yourself to that once you hopefully gain power. So, you know, you would hit all of the things about immigration, about education, about energy, about foreign policy, you know, about jobs, about balancing the budget, cutting spending, about the culture. You know, we know, I think Breitbart, Andrew Breitbart, you know, talked about politics downstream of culture, if I'm not mistaken, but it's I think quite true. So the Republicans are so hesitant about taking on culture, and I think it's a shame. But anyway, also you have your 10-point program, and you run on that, and it's easily seen, and you share it, and then that becomes your blueprint when you hopefully take power. All of those things, again, cutting spending, balancing the budget, bringing jobs back, you know, sort of an America First agenda, where we're, you know, maybe imposing tariffs as, you know, something I used to be sort of against. But really immigration, culture, Judeo-Christian values, I think we should strongly promote as the founding principle guiding the nation. And so I would, you know, so anyway, you have your, you know, law and criminality, you know, and so forth. You know, being pro-life, of course, is always part of that, I would say. But anyway, you list your 10, 12 points, which, you know, I did because I just took what I had as my own agenda, and then, you know, I put it in the book. I worked through those fairly strenuously, so I thought they were ready to go. But then there's, you know, let's say it just fails. Let's say no matter what we do, the Republicans are the Republicans, and they're always going to disappoint us. So the next thing would be what I describe as, and I should mention, I borrow heavily from Daniel Horowitz. It's really kind of a great intellectual, I would say, in the conservative movement. But, you know, he sort of turned me on to this, and he interviewed me as well. So we sort of know each other. But what I describe and what he describes as the red state initiative, the red states, of which there are many, roughly half the country, where we have the trifecta of both houses and the governor. So you got overwhelming majorities of Republican power. Again, the two houses and the governor. Use it. And then I have what I call a red state manifesto. And I bring up a lot of different things that we would want to, and a lot of it are health related, because I conceived of this during COVID, when we had all of these red states that were just locking us down, shutting us down, keeping our kids out of school, mandating vaccines, just awful. No better at all than the Democrats. So there's a lot about that, because we see how important that is, but other things as well about protecting the from the federal government, from the DOJ, the FBI. I talk about sort of change of venue sort of things, because we see when you try, you indict Trump in New York City, you're not going to get a fair trial. So you need to have, just as I believe, maybe it's the Eighth Amendment or the Sixth Amendment, but you are guaranteed a speedy trial before a fair and impartial jury. That's in the Bill of Rights. And you're not going to get that in certain blue jurisdictions. So change of venue, because even in these blue cities, if you go outside of the city into the hinterland, like, you get outside of the coast, California is as red as Indiana. It's funny. It's just that their politics is dominated by San Francisco and LA and the big cities, San Diego. But once you're into the hinterlands, it's quite conservative. So I would say that what I call my red state manifesto, and I outline a lot of things of how to protect, how to basically create sanctuaries for the Constitution, for the Judeo-Christian tradition, and for conservative philosophy.
Awesome. Dr. Moss, thank you for coming on the GGV podcast. It was a real pleasure to have you. Before we go, is there anything else you want to add to the audience, like where, for example, they can find you? What is your favorite chapter of the entire book? And, and if people want to ask you any questions?
Oh, well, I have to look. There's a lot of chapters there. Some are big and some are small, but maybe I do sort of enjoy a little bit of my sort of sarcasm, where I talk about Barack Obama, contemplating, he's won 2 terms. He's almost, if not a billionaire. He has mansions in Hawaii and all over the place. And I comment, and of course in Martha's Vineyard, and there he is still. I mean, what a privileged person. And so we sort of make fun of him quite a bit as how in your imagination you could come up with the idea that you're oppressed. I mean, 2-term president, I mean, that alone should sort of take care of that issue.
Right.
how wealthy he is, and all the prestige and status he has. So maybe that chapter is if you want to say my favorite, but there's a few good ones in there that are like that. But that's a pretty good one, where I do a major takedown on Barack Obama, because I, again, compare my growing up. He lived a very comfortable life. He grew up in Hawaii. I grew up in the Bronx, the son of a single mom with 5 boys, no welfare. She worked every day. So I'll match myself up against him and his very privileged childhood any day of the week. And plus, I spent 3 years working in the poorest countries in the world, and I made not a dime doing it. So I know all about poverty. So I just consider him a real fraud in the worst ways. But he's, like they say, liberals come to do good, and they do very well indeed. But basically, you can find my website is a good place, richardmossmd.com. And I'm on, all of the various social medias, Richard Moss, MD, I think, Facebook and Twitter and
I will definitely add all these links in the description of the video.
right.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Moss, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you took the time to come on the GGV Publishing Podcast. And we will keep, promoting the book, and hopefully that a lot of people really write reviews so that they can be aware of the fact that there is always a solution to the current problem. So thank you very much, Dr. Moss. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. You take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was my pleasure to have Dr. Richard Moss on the GGV Publishing Podcast. This episode will be released next week. Awesome.